Lynn, the first question is on Afghanistan, and it comes from Washington, D.C., from an individual who is one of several who is tasked with putting together policy for Afghanistan. And he says, Mr. LaRouche, as I'm sure you know, on Friday, a number of people joined Ambassador Holbrooke in a trip to Afghanistan where we are beginning to flesh out the details of what the Obama administration's policy will be. It is certainly a policy which is much different than the policy of the previous administration, and also different perhaps than when we first conceptualized immediately after the election. There is talk ultimately of moving literally hundreds of diplomats and other professionals into the region to help expedite this policy overall. In the meantime, the situation in Pakistan grows more grave and more unstable. You have addressed this on many previous occasions, but we were wondering if you would be willing to give us an overview in terms of direction of what you think are the priorities to be addressed.
First of all, you have to realize we're in a war situation. The war is against the British Empire and the British Empire's war against us. What is being done now is it's been done recently with these bailouts. If you look at what happened recently with this thing that was the most angering part of the bailout among the American people, when they found out that the money which the federal government had given for bailout into the U.S. system, as in AIG, was being used for massive benefits for foreigners. Right? So what has been happening is the United States is being subjected to a pressure to destroy the United States as a nation through hyperinflation. And through these bailouts of this type. We're engaged in a war against the British Empire. Now, I think that probably President Obama would be sympathetic to by saying that, emotionally at least. But the point is, this policy of ignoring that issue, we're under attack by a force which is determined to destroy our nation, a force which is called the British Empire. What they're doing is they're sowing the seeds of a hyperinflation like that which Germany went through in the 1920s inside the United States by these bailout operations. And the British think it's very clever, and they're bringing people in Europe online to join in this thing of raping the United States. Now, every policy we deal with has got to deal with the premise we're under attack in like warfare by the British Empire. And defeating the British Empire is the case. Make the point, Afghanistan. Drugs. Drugs grown by a farmer in Afghanistan. Opium. Maybe $500 or $600 crop per year. What's that crop worth on the European market? How many millions of dollars is that crop worth on the European market? The idea that we have a problem in Afghanistan in which U.S. military and other forces ought to be engaged is insane. We are not in there to shoot farmers, even opium-growing farmers. That is a stupid idea. The idea we have to have a military force in there to manage that thing sociologically is insane. We can't even manage an American city, let alone a nation like Afghanistan. So don't put in advisors to manage that nonsense. What you have to do is you have to talk to Russia, to China, to India, and other concerned countries, and use our concerted force to get rid of every dope peddler moving drugs across borders. We have to toughen up all the drug laws. Any such drug laws, and these substances which are in this category, have to be banned. Absolutely. If we have to jam the prison camps for the time being until we get that thing cleaned up, we should do it. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to have a civilization. That's your choice. Forget the ideology. Now, who is running the drug war? Who is conducting the warfare against the United States on drugs and other countries? George Soros, who, among other things, controls Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives. You're serious about the drug problem? You're serious about the Afghanistan problem? Get Nancy Pelosi out of the chair. Push her off the table. So therefore, I am against the idea that we have to have a virtual occupation policy in Afghanistan. I don't want Americans wasting their lives in Afghanistan with the idea they're going to manage the thing, make things better. What you have to do is one thing, just the same thing that our Attorney General is doing with respect to Mexico, in cooperation with President Calderon of Mexico. We have to shut that border down. Not against Mexican people, not against commerce, but we have to get rid of that weapons and drug traffic 2 ways across the border. We can do that. Do it. And do it by getting nations to cooperate with each other for common benefit. And do it by punishing the British every time they turn around. George Soros has committed what we consider crimes. Why is he still running loose? What about Lord Malik Brown? He's no good either. What about the President Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister? He's no good either. The former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was more evil and even worse. He was the liar who got us into the war in Iraq. Get rid of these guys. Get them out. Don't cater to them. Don't treat them as respectable. They're not respectable. And create a condition under which countries by themselves, for example, most farmers, like in the drug growing, the farmer who gets into the drug circuit becomes a part of a drug empire. And he's not going to get more money than he would by growing a crop. He's going to be absorbed into the process. He's going to be oppressed and looted. He's going to go into virtual slavery to the drug lords, who are developing armies with which to deal with taking over the control of governments, of entire government areas, nation states. We have to have a policy which is progressive, does not, and we have to have a policy of recognizing that the British Empire in its present form under the Fabian Society government is the enemy of the United States. And we have to break that. That must be our policy. The other side of our policy, which is what I'm promoting, is we have to have an agreement with Russia, first of all. And discussion with Russia on this is crucial, because Russia is the most likely nation to move with us under the right conditions to bring China and India and some other countries together in a Eurasian bloc in alliance with the United States to deal with various problems, including the organization of a financial reform and recovery. So by building up we have to take, in other words, you have to go back to the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. And instead of limiting the Peace of Westphalia concept to giving some benefits to our neighbors and not killing our neighbors, we have to go beyond that. We have to take the idea of affirmative changes in policy as being a Westphalian principle. We have to be working to do something good for the development of other nations and induce nations to cooperate in doing good for each other. This is not a diminution of sovereignty, it's an affirmation of sovereignty. That a nation has the right to be free, to do good for itself and others. And that should be the policy of the United States. We are best suited among all nations to do that by virtue of our history. You see, let me remind people, especially as these questions come in, of one principle here. The people who colonized the United States, or what became the United States, as in the course of the 17th century, as in the case of Massachusetts, for example. I have some ancestors who were involved in that, the rival in Massachusetts, so there was an invested interest in this matter. That we came here in these colonizations not as refugees from Europe. We came under the inspiration of a policy which was spread within Europe under the influence radiated from Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa in the middle of the century, of the 15th century. Now, Cusa, in the development of the wars, which developed during and following the fall of Constantinople, realized that a reaction had occurred in Europe, a trend for the worse. And on this basis, he proposed a policy, which is one of the last policies he proposed before he died, that Europe, the people of Europe who were dedicated, should go across the oceans to engage Europeans who were concerned with places across the oceans, and thus to build up a foil there to act on Europe to stop the kind of destruction typified later on by the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, that sort of thing. That Cusa died in that century, but his friends didn't. And Christopher Columbus, who was a seaman of Genoese progeny, operating in the Portuguese service, Atlantic service, met in Lisbon with a friend of Cusa's, a clergyman, and had contact with writings by Cusa pertaining to this project. So approximately 1480, Christopher Columbus, who was an extended literary exchange with Cusa's friends in Italy, was able in 1492 to finally get the funding to conduct this voyage across the Atlantic, an ocean he knew, in order to start this kind of process of developing relations with the people on the other side of the ocean to balance off the degeneration which was occurring in Europe. That was his intention. And over the course of the following century, going into the beginning of the 17th century, there were whole legions of people, or shiploads of people, as with the Mayflower, and as from Spain in other cases, who traveled across the Atlantic to create settlements in North America and in Central America, whose intention was, whose purpose was, to build up new cultures, new civilization, at a safe distance from the corruption which had taken over Europe, and thus to take the best of European culture across the ocean to build up the allies for the liberation of Europe from the evils of oligarchy, of the feudal and similar kinds of oligarchy. That is our intention. That was our intention then. That is our character. Most Americans came from European origins until recently. Most came here originally to found colonies which would then take the best of European culture, cleansed of its oligarchical associations, to build up in the Americas a force which could then act on Europe to liberate Europe from itself, to liberate it from the idea of aristocracies and oligarchies and titles, and to reduce all citizens to the rank of citizen. That was the intention. Our intention was to take the best of European culture, freed of the dirty stuff, and to bring the best of European culture into other parts of the world. That was Roosevelt's policy. So that policy goes to the soul of the United States. We, because of our history, are the best example, the best natural example of that policy. That's the policy of Franklin Roosevelt, not Truman. And the policy is we must seize what we are. We are Americans in that sense. Not in a chauvinist sense, but in that sense. Our purpose is to present the world with the idea of a sovereign nation state, which is without oligarchy, and which is committed to the greatest principles of civilization of mankind in general, and to promote them, and to promote the freedom of nations to exercise that kind of privilege. In dealing with this Afghanistan question and other questions, we have to take an affirmative moral position that we are not in areas to manage these areas, to condition them, to treat them like children. Our job is to inspire people and to give them the freedom to be able to be inspired. And the first thing we have to deal with to do is to get rid of the British Empire and George Soros. Get them out of our politics and shut down everything they represent. The British Empire is our enemy. And anyone who's competent to be president or an official of the United States ought to recognize that. We're not out to make war on them. We're out to liberate them by getting rid of people like Tony Blair and similar Fabian types who are about the most evil thing that slimes around the earth today. And therefore, our job is not to go in and conquer areas one at a time. Our job is to organize nations together for collaborative efforts which deal with these evils which oppress us. And this drug traffic is an evil we should shut down. And if the British Empire doesn't like it, we'll shut them down too. And we have to start from that. Don't start from this thing, we're going to negotiate, we're going to do this. Oh, it's namby-pamby stuff. Cut it out. Get tough, but be righteous. Don't oppress, but destroy what needs to be destroyed for the sake of humanity. And I don't like this idea of going into Afghanistan. It's a wrong policy. It's a compromise with something else, and I don't think we ought to make those kinds of compromises. I don't think we need to. I think we ought to destroy the British Empire, and then the people will listen to us, we can get everything done.